Ladies and gentlemen, the following is another impressive episode of the Wrestling Fans Podcast, Ringside Society. In one corner, we have the greatest thing on God's green earth. No, I'm not talking Mary Jane or money or Popeye spinach. He is the trackle dart of Ringside Society and Delaware's greatest American hero. It takes two to make a thing go right. He is Rob Bass, and you are not. In the second quarter, we have that ocean crossing, straight up Boston, flight catching, shot glass snatching, always on the go. Catch him if you can. Said his name in Guyana. Now they love him in Japan. No cap, the worldwide star boy, Remy Blue. And our special guest tonight, and hold your horses, take a seat, have a sip of water, because believe it or not, he doesn't wrestle. He does not even get in the ring, but we had to have him on the show because he did something phenomenal for the wrestling culture. He did something tremendous for the wrestling culture, informative and never before seen. Welcome to the show, everybody. Writer and director for Lady Wrestler, the amazing and untold story of African American women in the ring, Mr. Chris Bournea. Or is it Bournea?
Bournea. Thanks for that amazing
Woo!
intro, Remy. It's awesome to be here. Thank you.
Chris, I gotta say, it was. Did you? I didn't get it. Was it Bournea or Bournea?
It's Bournea, like born, like, but just put an A on the end. Bournea. Yep.
Bournea. Okay. I don't like messing up people's names, man.
I
I got that
appreciate
much.
it, but
I
I've
got
been
that
called
much
everything
respect.
but a child of God, so I'm used to it.
All right. So everybody, welcome to the show. Chris Bournea, writer and director of Lady Wrestler, the amazing and untold story of African American women in the ring. That's right. And you're wondering, Remy, what are you talking about? Well, you know something. For those of you that know, I am a proud black man. I'm unapologetically black. Yes, even though I have two white. Rob is that would be that one guy that's always invited to the cookout. If you watch the Boondocks, remember the teacher that had made Huey be in charge of the Christmas play? That's Rob. So yeah. And Kathy, I'm convinced, maybe Kathy's another one too. So I got love for them, but at the same time, I love my culture as well too. It is rich, it is great. And just I'm gonna say it, and if y'all want to cancel me, cancel me. But just because you have love for your culture does not mean you don't have love for anybody else of a different ethnicity. So I'm just gonna say that right now before y'all think, oh Remy, are you trying to be Farouk or are you trying to be some radical whatever? Because I know some of y'all probably you're quick to jump to that. So y'all stop it. You got a little bit of knowledge right there. Chris, I gotta say, thank you very much. When I first what actually attracted me to your work, and I'm actually still watching the documentary because I finally got to see it. I didn't even know it came out. I knew about it before, but it was WrestleMania time, and um, I saw that they were doing the Legacy Awards, which okay, I understand you're doing that, but at the same time, I mean, I kind of like it and I don't like it. But then they mentioned Ethel Johnson and Ethel Johnson, and I was like, okay. But then I heard that apparently they used the wrong picture for Ethel Johnson,
Yes.
and it was her, I think her granddaughter or great niece that mentioned it.
Yes.
And then I saw that she also mentioned because and you for those of you listening to Ringside Society, I was going to mention later on, but coming soon, we'll be having a thing called the Legacy Series, where those wrestlers who have passed on, we have their significant others, their relatives on our show, giving us interviews as to how it was living with them. But that's another story. But I saw that she mentioned you, and she mentioned your book, well, not book, but the series, but the movie, the documentary. I was like, that is interesting. Like we've heard so many things about what black wrestlers have had to do in the past, and but nobody ever really like did a full on documentary about it, especially for black women.
Right.
And then I was like, you know something? I have to get this man on the show. Um, I would have gotten you on sooner, but Rob will tell you, I have so many people. I don't know if you're a comic book fan, and if you read X-Men, but when it comes to booking, it's like I'm like Professor X. There's like so many people like I can go to. I'm like, I have that person in Colorado, that person in New York. Boy, there's that person all the way over in Alabama and
Right.
California. Who can I have on? So many people, so little time. But I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my honor to be here. Truly it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just gotta so the first thing I always do with pretty much every host that we have here is what was the wrestling event or pay-per-view that made you become a fan of professional wrestling?
Yeah, it wasn't a single event. It was back in the 80s when I was growing up. I used to spend a lot of time over my grandparents, and they were early adopters of cable. So they had WTBS, that pay cable that basic cable channel. So I saw the WWF and its, that incarnation with Roddy Piper and Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. So that's when I became a wrestling fan. And my grandparents they call it the rec room, this room in their basement where they had this big floor model TV. And whenever the wrestlers that I liked, like Roddy Piper, who I got to incidentally interview for the documentary, when they would come on and do their matches, my grandparents had this big, huge body-sized pillow. I would throw myself around the floor and pretend like I was, Piper or whatever on this pillow. So that's when I became a wrestling fan. I was like in middle school at the time.
Wow, that was a great time to be a wrestling fan. I'm glad I was because I was born in '83, and I started watching in 1990, like between I guess you can call it the not the rock and wrestling era, but like I guess the golden era, and whatever you want to call the period of 1990 to 1995, but that's considered the golden era. That's when I started watching, and it was a great time to be a fan. I was hooked. But yeah, so who are some of your favorites that you enjoyed watching growing up?
Yeah, it was the WWF guys, Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant. And at that time, I wasn't really aware of women's wrestling. Like I know that was the same era that Glow started, that show with women wrestlers, but I wasn't aware of that. So I didn't really become aware of women's wrestling until I was introduced to these women and found out about all their contributions. So yeah, I was a newbie to women's wrestling. I didn't find out about. I sort of knew it. I sort of was aware of it, but I wasn't really like into it. I had never seen it before.
Yeah, back in those days, like women's wrestling was like almost they were around, but they weren't around. I remember
Right.
The first one I probably saw, I would say was '93. Whenever Alondra Blake started, that's when I
Okay.
started into it. And it's funny because they had the first, and it's funny because the first ever Survivor Series had for those of y'all that don't know this, that for those of y'all that are listening, because I'm sure Chris, and Rob know, but the thing I find astonishing is that the first Survivor Series back in 1987, it had a women's wrestling match. There was a women's elimination match. It was well done. I actually enjoyed it. Jimmy Hart took a crazy bump after he did a crazy bump after after getting a double drop kick by the jumping bomb angels, and that was a very great match.
Wow.
And then they just disappeared, and then they came back in the '90s, and they came back here and there in the '90s. Then they became a main thing, a frequent thing, a recurrent thing in the '90s,
Right.
and then started gaining more traction in the 2000s and so on. I'm very glad for the way they are now, though, because back then, oh geez, I look back at the way they had them for like eye candy, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I understand, but I like this generation more now. It's more athletic.
Right. It's almost like gone back to what it was when the women that I interviewed, because when the women I interviewed, when they started out, in the 50s, you really had to be an athlete. You couldn't just get up there and look cute in a leotard. You had to really know the holds, and you had to really be a real athlete. So it's almost like going back to like its roots.
So, so now, growing up, you can't rest. Did you ever get to go to any events like WrestleMania, Survivor Series, SummerSlam, any of those?
No, because no one else in my family that I knew of was into wrestling. So no one said, "Hey, let me take you to a wrestling match." Or even if I would have said to, my parents or grandparents or anyone in my family, "Hey, would you take me to a wrestling match?" It just wasn't on my radar screen. It wasn't like how, you just go buy a ticket to like a concert or something. I would not even have known that, a wrestling match was coming through town. It wasn't like how it is now. Well, pre-pandemic, when wrestling matches would come through town all the time. It was like, there, unless you were like reading the magazines and really into the culture, you wouldn't necessarily know when matches were coming through town. So yeah, I didn't get to see wrestling when I was a kid. I didn't get to see it live when I was growing up.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny how they say I was in the same boat too. I was like, I'm actually a first generation wrestling fan.
Okay.
But aside from my cousin and me and my cousin, we were like the only ones that watched it like hardcore and so on. But growing up, then again, I lived in Guyana, which is like a whole different continent. So I never really got to like go to any live wrestling events. I didn't end up going to my first. I didn't go to my first event until I was like 20. Was 2012 until I was like 20, 28 actually. 28 going on 29, and that was the WrestleMania 28. And then I started going to more and more events from there on out. But yeah, man, there's nothing like going to like a wrestling event, even WWE. It's just something about it. But I just gotta say, man, I'm just taken back at how well this documentary was. So tell us, man, how do you come about doing this great documentary, man? Because this is like, and for those of y'all watching, check this out. It's just something if you love wrestling, it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Latino, Polynesian. Check it out. It's a great part of history, and it's always good to know a little something about that. Especially the trials and tribulations and what happened back then to make now. What's the right word?
Yeah, to kind of pave the way.
Better and
pave the way.
Yeah. So how'd you go about how'd this come about?
Yeah, thank you for that, Remy. Yeah, so I have to say, for those who are watching, the man in the poster behind Rob Bass was a key part of this, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'll get to that. It's a little bit of a long-winded story, so please bear with me. So most of my career has been in print journalism. I was born in. Say what?
I was going to say take as long as you want. I'm off for the rest of the day. I don't know if Rob has a hot day tonight, so by all means, take as much as you want. We've had people on here for like 3 hours, so go ahead.
Cool. Thank you, Remy. So yeah, so I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, where women's wrestling really got its start, and not a lot of people know that. So most of my career has been in print journalism. I had always wanted to be a filmmaker, a writer, and a filmmaker. So I had made a couple of short films before I made this documentary, but I'd never really jumped head, full throttle into filmmaking until I made this documentary. So I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in English and started working at a local newspaper. So back in 2005, when I was working at this newspaper called This Week, which is affiliated with the Columbus Dispatch, which is the daily newspaper in Columbus, there was a man named Terry Anderson, who's a publicist, an African-American publicist, and I would call him for story ideas. So Terry, when I would call him, he would say, there's this really interesting lady you should sit down and interview sometime. I grew up with her. Her name's Ethel Johnson, and she was some kind of wrestler or bodybuilder, but she's always telling these interesting stories, and you should sit down and interview her sometime. So Terry set up an interview with Ethel and I back in December of 2005, and she just had these amazing stories of going all over the world as a wrestler. When she was a teenager, I mean, I'm talking about, so she and her family lived in Columbus. So they as a wrestler, she traveled all over the United States, all through Canada, Latin America, where she had a ring name as Rita Valdez, Japan, you name it. She went there and wrestled. So I ended up writing her story up for the Columbus Dispatch, and they published it during Women's History Month in March. So the story happened to come out the first weekend in March when Arnold Schwarzenegger holds his annual fitness festival in Columbus. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger's people saw the article and they called me at the newspaper and they said, this Ethel Johnson lady is really amazing. We never knew that women's wrestling was that strong back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you know, during her era. And especially, we didn't know there were Black women involved in it. We'd like to give Ethel a Lifetime Achievement Award at our closing ceremony this year. So by the time I interviewed her, Ethel was in her 70s. She was a retired grandmother. And she, even at the height of her wrestling career back in the 50s and 60s, she never really did like attention. She talks about in the documentary how she kept her career and her family life separate. She was a mother of several children and, you know, a wife. And, you know, when she was at home, she was a mom. And then she didn't even tell her children she was a wrestler. Her daughter, Shelly, talks about how she found out her mom was a wrestler by one day she and her friends were playing, you know, in front of the TV set. And one of her friends was like, hey, isn't that your mom in the wrestling ring? I mean, just imagine that, just seeing your mom in a wrestling ring and you finding out that's how she's a wrestler. So Ethel, to make a long story short, did not like attention. So she said, well, tell Arnold's people. I said, thanks, but no thanks. So I just thought if Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, this international, not only movie star, but fitness icon, you know, champion bodybuilder from back in the day, if he sees the merit in Ethel's story just from one newspaper article, there has to be something more to it. And in my research for the newspaper article, I had come across this documentary about women from the same era, from the 30s and 50s, who were wrestling, called Lipstick and Dynamite. And, you know, casting no aspersions on that documentary. That's a great documentary. I would recommend everybody to go see it. But they only talked about the white women of that era, like Mildred Burke, the first women's champion, and Fabulous Moolah and Penny Banner. I actually got to interview Penny Banner for the article I did. And she was just fabulous and raved about Ethel and the Black women. But I just thought they only mentioned in passing the Black women. Ethel's two sisters were also wrestlers. Actually, Ethel's oldest sister, Babs, was the one who got into the business first because she was recruited by this promoter named Billy Wolf, who used to be a wrestler and is from Missouri and settled in Columbus to start his women's wrestling enterprise. And Billy Wolf was inspired by Jackie Robinson. He thought, if I can bring Black women into wrestling, it'll bring a lot of attention and excitement to wrestling the way that Jackie Robinson did with Major League Baseball. So even though Billy Wolf was a very complicated man and a lot of people said he was a sexist and he kind of took advantage of women, he was kind of ahead of his time in terms of race relations. So he started recruiting Black women into the business. So that's how Ethel, her sister Babs, and their younger sister Marva got into the business. So after Ethel turned down that Lifetime Achievement Award from Arnold Schwarzenegger, I just asked her, I said, would you be willing to be interviewed on camera? I would love to make a documentary about your experiences. And surprisingly, she said yes. And so in the course of my research, I also came across, there were dozens, I mean, back in the height, there were dozens and dozens of Black women. Ethel and her sisters were only one of many. There was another woman from Columbus, Ohio, named Kathleen Wembley, who was married to Bobo Brazil, she was one of the first women to integrate pro wrestling. So there are many, many, many chapters to this story. Women who came after Ethel, like Sweet Georgia Brown. Vice News did one of their Dark Side of the Ring episodes about Sweet Georgia Brown. She wasn't in Billy Wolf's organization. She actually was promoted by Fabulous Moolah after Fabulous Moolah became a promoter. So just over the course of the years, from like the mid 2000s up through the 2010s, I interviewed Ethel. And then I came across another local woman named Ramona Isbell, who was also one of the first Black women to integrate pro wrestling, because this came about because I made an error in the newspaper article. I mentioned Ethel's peers at the time, other Black women who wrestled, and I misspelled Ramona's last name. Her last name is Isbell, and I misspelled it as Israel, like the country. And her daughter called me at the newspaper, was like, just so you know, you misspelled my mother's name. You know, nice article. And I was like, well, thank you for bringing that to my attention. And, I'm in the course of making this documentary. Do you think your mother would be interested? And fortunately, Ramona, she was about to retire as she had a second career as an administrator with the state of Ohio. So Ramona was just so sweet and accessible. It was like, oh, I'm about to retire. I have all the time in the world to talk to you. So I got to talk to Ethel. And then there's a reporter named Will Haygood who works for the Washington Post, who's also from Columbus. And we started out at the same Black newspaper, the Call and Post. And Will would periodically return to Columbus. And when I told him this story, he was like, you have to talk to my colleague, Jeff Lean, who wrote a biography of Mildred Burke, the first women's champion. I went to Washington, D.C. and interviewed Jeff. And Jeff was like, if you're really serious about researching women's wrestling, you need to go to the University of Notre Dame. They have this huge, huge wrestling archive. There was this promoter named Pfeffer, Jack Pfeffer, who I call him an organized pack rat. He saved everything. So he had like tons and tons of newspaper clippings, photos of the women, letters back and forth to the women when he would promote matches, letters from another promoter named Al Haft in Columbus, who was a big figure in the National Wrestling Alliance. So just through word of mouth, I was able to piece together this story. And what was really surprising to me was that I grew up in Columbus in the Black community, started my career at Black newspapers, and never knew about these women. No one ever mentioned them. I never came across photos of them. I never came across newspaper clippings of them. So I didn't find out about these women until I was an adult. And I just think that's just a shame that this part of history has been erased. And partly I think it's because, as you mentioned, Remy, women's wrestling seems to go through these, what I call boom and bust cycles. Like it's popular for a while, then it kind of wanes, then it comes back into popularity, but it's not this sustained popularity that men's wrestling has. And I hope that will change. So that's one of the goals with the documentary too, is just to kind of elevate women. And Roddy Piper talks about in the documentary, he says, when during his day, at the height of his fame, women were always just used as flash and, like you said, window dressing and kind of the TNA, just to draw in fans who would drool over them instead of being looked at as real athletes. But ironically, back in the 30s up through the 50s, when Billy Wolf was really at the height of his power promoting women's wrestling, the women wrestlers back then, yes, they had this glamorous image, but they were seen as real athletes, and he insisted on them being real athletes. So like I said, hopefully it's coming back. Women's wrestling is coming back to its roots, and things are coming kind of full circle.
Honestly, I despise that era, because I always said that, I don't mean to knock. I know it's like McMahon in a way that actually started that whole thing with, the divas. And I was like, yeah, they look good, but I mean, I want people that can wrestle. And the thing is that upset me was like, not upset, but annoyed me was like, it was pretty much like Vince looked into it. And I always tell people this. It was like Vince looked into a catalog and said, hey, you look good enough to be my champion. I don't care if you can't wrestle. You look good. Right. I'll hire you. And that's what I did not like. And I'm glad that era is over. Yes, kudos to the Bella Twins and Alicia Fox for breaking records and whatnot. But, coming from me, I did not care for that era at all.
Right.
And I'm glad that now that it's been on an upswing. If I'm using that word correctly, I'm glad that it's seeing an upswing, and I just hope that it keeps on keeping on as well. And I'm very happy that they're actually making it. And the thing is, the thing I like too is that more and more places they're doing like not just a women's title, like a women's tag team title, and hopefully we can get a 6 women's tag team title eventually, like Stardom has in Japan. But yeah, man, I'm still watching the documentary. I'm like almost an hour in, and I was like, I paused it obviously, but I was like, I had an idea of what happened, but I didn't know like it was that like there was a lot of that going on. I mean, obviously there was racism. There was actually flat out barefaced racism. But the good part of it was that Ethel and her sisters, they got to travel. I didn't even know they were traveling overseas at that time. Yeah. I was like, they went to Japan, Europe, and Australia. I'm like, What? I thought women's wrestling was just like
Right. Like you
the
think, oh, it's
Mexican.
back then you think, oh, it's just in the local high school auditorium or something. They put on little matches on the weekend or whatever. No, these women were serious athletes, international superstars going all around the world.
So it's funny because I just got an idea that popped in my head. So, Chris, I gotta ask you. You're
Mm-hmm.
obviously aware of the Cauliflower Alley Club, and
Yeah.
this film just came out. It just came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
Please, 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 please tell me you're calling these people and asking them if you could have a special presentation because this is something people need to know. Like they need to see this. It is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just now getting around to reaching out to people like the Cauliflower Alley Club, and I've had different people who stumble across the film like you did, and reach out to me. So the next phase of it's currently streaming on Amazon Prime Video. So the next phase of the release is releasing it on DVD because a lot of people, especially older school wrestling fans, want to have that physical media. And then I've had like even library, like this lady in Istanbul, Turkey, emailed me and she was like, I'm a librarian at the university here in Istanbul, and we would like to have a copy of your documentary on DVD. So there is international people around the world find these women, just fascinating. I got to go to the Cannes Film Festival a few years ago with I didn't screen the documentary there, but they have this marketplace where you can like network with producers and stuff. And I met Viola's husband and producing partner. Everybody I told about this story was like, oh my God, I didn't know women were wrestling back in the 50s, let alone Black women. So the fact that these women were doing things that so few women were working outside the house, and then so few women were athletes. And even now, I mean, how many women can you say are like the main top billed, star in any given sport? I mean, there's still a lot of progress to be made. So these women they really shattered a glass ceiling, and it's unfortunate that their story just kind of faded into obscurity. But I have to say, in all honesty, part of that is due to the women themselves. Because the story I told about Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ethel turned down that award from Arnold Schwarzenegger. There were other times when people who still remembered her would invite her to be, inducted into a Hall of Fame, and she would, politely say no. And another woman I approached for an interview but did not agree to it, who has since passed away, is Lula May Provo. That was and as her daughter Valerie later explained to me, she had so many experiences with racism and so many, it's almost like she went through like post-traumatic stress disorder, where she also had a second career after she left wrestling and did not want to revisit that. So I do have to say, part of it is society not really recognizing the value of these women and kind of letting their story fade away. And then part of it is the women themselves. They weren't like fabulous moolah going around, accepting every offer and, parading around with the WWE when they're into their 60s and 70s. A lot of the women, the Black women, once they were done wrestling, it was like, that's it. I'm never talking about it again. That's it, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad you actually made sure this story didn't fade away. I'm glad you actually decided to actually make it happen. And, like I said, I hope that eventually, because, I, as my years have actually progressed, I have 30 years of being a fan. And as my years progressed and I got older, I'm looking at certain things with a different light. And now I look at wrestling for the art of it, not just for the fun and the storyline, but I look at it as an art form as well. So that's how I've gotten now. And I'm more into going to certain things. And like I mentioned, the Cauliflower Alley Club, which is one place I really want to go to. And for those of y'all listening, if you don't know what the Cauliflower Alley Club is, it is the Hall of Fame that a wrestling fan should go to. And that's definitely where the wrestling culture is. I mean, yeah, the WWE Hall of Fame is pretty nice, but if you really want the full gist of professional wrestling, it's the Cauliflower Alley Club. That's where you got to go to. It's over there in Las Vegas. And I'm hoping that, I look one day and I see, yes, in a certain room, pay how much money, and you can see a screening of Lady Wrestler. Because like I said, that's a great thing that you definitely did there. and I'm glad you got to catch it as well. So I have like two more questions. I know Rob has some questions for you as well. But in terms of um, so WrestleMania for the first time ever, well, or second time ever, we had two female wrestlers that main evented, and they were also African American. So, what was your mindset after doing, this documentary where you captured a story that almost went into obscurity, to now seeing two black women and on the biggest stage of it all, wrestling for the SmackDown Women's title? What was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome progress. But I do have to say, I don't think it would have happened had it not, unfortunately, been for the George Floyd incident and all the protests that happened behind that whole incident and all the calls for social justice and the racial reckoning we went through. I don't think just randomly in any random given year, you would have had two black women headlining like that. It was almost like all these big corporations, WWE and corporations that even have nothing to do with wrestling, they felt like they had to make some kind of statement saying they support African Americans, even if they didn't issue a statement saying Black Lives Matter. They had to do something where they would show they were in solidarity with African Americans. So yes, I thought it was great. I thought it was progress, but unfortunately it took a trauma and a whole lot of backlash and a whole lot of people literally taking to the streets for something like that to happen. I just hope that the consciousness that's been raised behind that whole incident with George Floyd doesn't just fade away and people just go back to quote unquote normal. And I unfortunately, I just think women and black people are still going to have to continue to fight for opportunities. I don't think it's like, okay, now the door's been, thrown open and we're all going to be equal and we're all going to live in peace and harmony from now on. I still think it's going to be a fight and a struggle for women and black people and other people of color to get opportunities, not only in the wrestling industry, but just in any given industry. But I do think that was great progress, and I was glad to see it happen for sure.
Awesome. So I just got one more question before I turn it over to Rob. So in terms of the in terms of this documentary, do you have any other documentaries planned in regards to professional wrestling for the near future?
I would if the circumstances come together, I would actually like to do a follow-up to Lady Wrestler, because since Lady Wrestler has come out, several people have contacted me. Like, I've been in touch with Kathleen Wembley, who's still alive and well, lives on the East Coast, told me that she had a very different experience from Babs and Ethel and Marva, because she decided to leave Columbus at a young age and kind of go out on a different circuit than they did. And she was married to Bobo Brazil, and she and Bobo have children together. So I would love to explore that chapter of Kathleen's experience. There are children of other black female wrestlers of Ethel's same era who have contacted me and said, hey, my mom had a different experience, and she had some rough experiences that I would like to talk about. So I would like to do a follow-up, talking to some other people from that era, because with any story, there's layers and layers and chapters, and there's only so much you can fit into like one, 90-minute documentary. So I would definitely like to do a follow-up for sure.
Awesome. Well, whenever you get that documentary, if you do, I really and truly hope you do that follow up. Whenever you get that done, let us know if there's anything we could do on our part here at Ringside Society, because we're more. I like to consider us more than a podcast. We're that one movement where we don't just do interviews, but we like to let the fans know. So whenever you decide, if there's anything you need on our part, even if it's just us just sharing that, hey, the follow-up to Lady Wrestler is coming out, let us know. We'll make it happen. We will plug it as well. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob Bates, because I know Rob has some questions for you as well. So Rob, go ahead, man. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about the documentary. It was a All right, sweet. Thanks, Remy. So what's going on, Chris, man? How's everything going tonight?
Good, good. How you doing, Rob?
I'm all right, man. I'm just hanging out, man. Just chilling, chatting with y'all, man. Having a blast.
Awesome.
So you getting ready for the man? Man, you ready for the Olympics, man? Don't they start tonight?
Yeah, I actually watched the opening ceremony this morning, and Simone Biles is from Columbus, that's my hometown, and the
Okay.
same town that the women wrestlers are from. She was born in
Ooh,
Columbus
nice.
before she went into foster care and moved out of state. So I'll definitely be cheering and rooting on Simone for sure.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I hope she takes down all the gold. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
She's awesome. I like her. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
She's awesome. Yeah. I hope she goes out there tears it up. Yeah. What's your favorite Olympic sports watching?
I
What's
would
your
have to
favorite to
say
watch?
I would have to say gymnastics, because all I've learned about the wrestling industry making this documentary, the women, at least from the era that I studied, they had to learn gymnastic and tumbling techniques, because they did a lot of tumbling and, jumping and flipping over the ropes and everything. So I'd have to say gymnastics. It's just, to me, it's like they defy gravity for sure.
Oh yeah. When I watched that too, I'm like, yeah. Cause like, what's from UCLA? She would do that, the little dance routine on the thing. She like start dancing and then go out there.
Yeah,
I'm like, man, I can't even imagine just doing any of
I
that. Like, woo,
know.
y'all are just badass. You know what I mean? Like, woo, y'all do the thing.
I know,
Now
right?
you were talking about Glow earlier and stuff,
Mhm.
man. Did you ever get to watch that show on Netflix?
I
You
did.
ever get to check it out?
I did. I watched the pilot episode, the first episode, and I liked it. I thought it was entertaining, and I know that was like accurate to how a lot of those women that participated in the original Glow were recruited. They were like just sort of recruited, and they weren't necessarily wrestlers. They were just recruited to learn wrestling moves and to star in Glow. But the difference I saw with the women I interviewed is that they were they trained as athletes before they went into the ring. They trained just like any other wrestler and learned all the moves. So whereas Glow was just like, these women were basically actresses who were, or just ordinary people who were recruited off the street. The women that I interviewed, they were true athletes who really were committed to training and conditioning, just like the Olympic athletes do when they're preparing, to do their sports.
Now I do want to ask, with your now I did want to ask, with your doing the documentary, man, like you had the idea and you wanted to doing all that, but what is it? What do you have to do to get it rolling and stuff, man? Do you have to line it to get produced and stuff, man? Do you have to like get a bunch of people, like do you got to pull your money together and all this stuff and like schedule the interviews and stuff? Because that stuff seems interesting to me. I love documentaries and all, and I'm always wondering like how do these people get these together and what do they do?
Yeah, there's a variety of different ways that people produce documentaries. So like when you're at a real high level, like let's say Ken Burns, who does all those documentaries for PBS, they have, they approach big foundations for grants, and they find other people who, give them donations so they can like hire the best camera people, hire the best sound people, maybe create recreations with like hiring actors or doing like little animated recreations of the topics that they're describing. But for me, I was actually inspired by Spike Lee and Robert Rodriguez, and both Spike Lee and Robert Rodriguez, they made their first films just by kind of using the resources they had at their disposal. So, I mean, just call it naive, whatever. But I was like, okay, I can go buy a camera and kind of learn this filmmaking as I go along, because, I've always been a movie buff, and I've watched dozens of movies, and I read about how Spike Lee made She's Gotta Have It. Now, granted, Spike Lee went to film school, but I also read Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew, of how he raised the money for El Mariachi by donating blood. And he just kind of taught himself filmmaking, bought like a used film camera and used like a cassette recorder to record the dialogue. So I was like, well, a documentary is nowhere near as demanding as like a fictional film. All you're doing is setting up a camera and asking people to talk into the camera. I mean, there's a lot more to it, as I came to learn. But I went and bought, a camera, like at the time they were still making the mini DV tapes. So I bought like a high-end mini DV camera, and just kind of, since the women were right here in my hometown, the only traveling I had to do was like, I mentioned Jeff Lean, the Washington Post reporter, had traveled to go to University of Notre Dame. So I just kind of paid for it out of my own pocket. And when I was working on Lady Wrestler, it was kind of when Kickstarter was just starting. And I had this misconception that crowdfunding was like going around with a tin can begging people. So I was like, I don't want to do that. There's no dignity in begging people for money. Later, I've evolved. Like there's nothing wrong with crowdfunding. In fact, it can help you build up your audience because it helps people to find out about the project. So I funded Lady Wrestler entirely by myself. I was sort of like a one-man band. Now, I do have to say my friend Paul that I went to high school with was really instrumental because he's a professional filmmaker and editor, and he went to film school, and he works at an organization at Ohio State University called the Wexner Center for the Arts. The Wexner Center has these fellowships that they give to filmmakers from all over the world, where they give you basically free post-production. So I recorded all the narration in the Wexner Center's sound booth. Paul took like my little like rough footage and shaped it into his professional editing system. He transferred it there and like just really, really polished it up. So I have to give mad credit to Paul, and also another filmmaker friend of mine named April Martin, who helped run camera. So I wasn't a complete one-man band, but it was, me and at times a very small crew with Paul and April who did all the filming, and, I just funded it myself out of my own pocket. So the downside of that is, sometimes you're kind of scrounging for resources. The upside is that, I don't have to answer to anybody. I don't have to, say, I didn't have to, like when I was, editing the movie, say, oh, well, you get the final say about the edit because you cut the check to pay for everything, since everything came out of my own pocket. So the way I did it is not necessarily the way that I would recommend other people do it. I would say just anybody who wants to make a documentary, I would say do your research. It might benefit you to do some crowdfunding or to try to find a producer who can, kind of help you pull everything together. But I just decided to do everything myself, kind of do it yourself.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Now, when you had to do the interviews with these ladies and stuff, how long were you there at, like, their house or whatever? Were you there, like, was it like a couple-hour process? And then were you there, because you said a lot of them, they're grandmas and stuff now and all.
Yeah.
Were they like, all right, man, you trying to get some grub on, I'm about to whip something up right now, And I'm all about that, Did you get any of that?
Well, what was interesting with Ethel, she, as I said, she always kept her private life private. So she never wanted to do interviews at her house. So we would meet we did one interview in a big conference room at this local arts organization called the King Arts Complex that's named after Martin Luther King. They were awesome. They gave me this great discount on using this really huge boardroom of theirs. Other interviews we did in conference room at local libraries. And then Ramona, I actually did a couple interviews with her at local libraries. And then we actually did an interview at this place that used to be Memorial Hall, which was a big event hall where they actually used to have wrestling matches back in the day. So that was cool, kind of interviewing her I don't know if she ever actually wrestled at Memorial Hall, but I know they had wrestling matches there. And then Ethel Brown, who sadly just passed away, I actually drove down to Atlanta because she had moved out of Columbus like years and years ago. And so I drove down to Atlanta, and so I was there I was at her house for maybe a couple hours, and she was just so gracious and cool. Leaving her house, I actually got lost in the back roads of Georgia. And when I tell you, I was like, oh God, I'm in like Dukes of Hazzard country. It's like this lone black man driving this little, raggedy Honda. And luckily I found my way to a hotel, but I mean, that was kind of scary. And a funny story with Ramona is the first time I interviewed her at Memorial Hall, I forgot to turn her microphone on. So, that's the downside of being a one-man band. I was doing everything myself, running sound, setting up the camera. So she had gone like 20 minutes into her story telling me how she got into wrestling and was recruited by Billy Wolf. And then I just happened to glance over at the camera and saw that the little sound bars weren't moving. And so I had to say, Miss Ramona, I am so sorry. I forgot to turn your microphone on. Would you mind telling me your whole life story again? So we were there for so each interview was like a couple of hours. We did this one big interview at the King Arts Complex. It was like an entire day. We got there in the morning and left in the evening. And that was with Ethel, her daughters, Shelly and Nina, and her niece, Kim Martin, who was her sister Marva's daughter. So that was the only shoot that was like the entire day. But it was like a couple hours each interview. And then Kenny Clark, the Detroit wrestling fan, I found him. He actually emailed me at the newspaper and was like, I saw your article about Ethel Johnson. I was a fan back in the day. Can you introduce me to her? And I said, I can't guarantee that because she's a really shy woman and really values her privacy. But, would you be willing to talk on camera about your experiences seeing Ethel and her sisters wrestling? So I drove to his house in Detroit and was there for a couple of hours. And you can't tell in the documentary, my friend Paul was edited the sound really well, but Kenny's neighbor was running his lawnmower on and off throughout the whole interview. And when I interviewed Jeff Lean, I had to drive to Washington, D.C. and do the interview in this conference room at a hotel. We just happened to be right next to the kitchen. So you could hear in the raw footage, like plates and forks and knives clanking around. Once again, Paul was able to like isolate all that background noise and filter it out. Thank God for him, because otherwise it would have been unusable. But yeah, it was definitely an adventure for sure.
That's awesome. See, I'm gonna check that. I'm gonna check your documentary out tonight and all, because I was gonna watch it earlier, but it's on Amazon, and I share my sister's account, and I was I don't want to, spend money on there. So like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? I want to ask first. You know what I mean? Before she puts me in a headlock. You know what I mean? So yeah, she's off work now. She gets off at 6. So by the time this is over, yeah, I'll be good to go. But yeah, so now I'm gonna watch that, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I might have little background stories on that, man. That's pretty cool. Cool. Now, I did see the playlist you had on there for there. All those songs on there, awesome. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Were they choices for you? You know what I mean, to put on there?
Yeah, and I actually had some of those songs in the original version of the documentary, but it's really, really expensive to get song rights. Like in the closing credits, I originally wanted Alicia Keys's "Superwoman" to be playing over the credits, and that would have been perfect because she says, I'm a superwoman, put an S on my chest. And I was like, that really, really sums up Ethel and, her sisters and all the women from that generation. But, unless I knew Alicia Keys personally and could say, hey, Alicia, could you cut me a deal? There was no way. There was another, and this is a really, really odd story. One of the songs I had on my playlist was Lita Ford's Only Women Bleed. Now, Lita Ford, was a heavy metal star back in the 80s, and she started out in a punk rock group called the Runaways with Joan Jett when they were teenagers. And they actually made a movie about the Runaways. And their story reminded me so much of Ethel and her sisters because they were these young girls traveling all over the world. There's a scene where they're in their dressing room in Tokyo and the fans like happen to see where their dressing room is and like try to break the door down. That's how crazy it was for Ethel and her sisters. So the reason I ended up interviewing Roddy Piper was because I love all different kinds of music, as you can tell from that playlist. And I had always been a Lita Ford fan. So I was just browsing around the internet and saw on Lita Ford's website that she was going to be at this convention, Days of the Dead. And the other people who were going to be there was the cast of They Live, that horror sci-fi movie with Roddy Piper. So I just packed up my camera, drove to Indianapolis, which is like a 4-hour drive from Columbus, and was like, I'm going to go meet Lita Ford. Then I'm going to ask Roddy Piper if he'd be willing to talk to me for my documentary. And it all worked out, luckily. I got to meet Lita Ford. She was really, really cool. Then I went over to Roddy Piper's autograph table, and I was like, told him about the documentary. He was like, yeah, I remember those women. I'd be happy to talk to you. But he was like, this was a Saturday. He was like, why don't you come back tomorrow when the line has died down a little bit? So I ended up having to drive back to Columbus, back to Indianapolis. And it took hours and hours and hours for him to come down from his hotel room. And his publicist was like, just between you and me, he's sleeping off a hangover. But you never would have known it. He was very, very, very easy to talk to and gave me a lot of good quotes.
That's pretty awesome. You get the interview to Rowdy one, man. That is great. Yeah. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Now, not only did you do the documentary and stuff, but you also have a podcast called Lady Wrestler. How'd that come about? And I've seen your lineup and stuff, man. You got some awesome, badass women on there. You know what I mean? Like, how did that come about? You getting those awesome women on there?
Well, thank you. And I have to admit, the reason why I ended up launching the podcast was because, again, this goes back to me being a big music fan. I've always been a huge Prince fan. And Prince, every time his estate releases a new album, that they find in his vault, there's this podcast called The Current that does a whole line of interviews with people that work with Prince about, like, they released the deluxe version of Sign of the Times last year. So they went and interviewed his Sign of the Times band. So I was like, oh, I could do that with Lady Wrestler. I could include, clips that didn't make it into the documentary and interview people that I didn't get to interview when I was shooting the documentary. So in the course of launching the podcast, I met different wrestling fans and people who were like, oh, you should interview Trish Adora, or you should interview, like, Ronnie Nicole actually emailed me and she had wanted to interview me for a podcast she has. And I was like, well, would you like to be on my podcast? She was totally accessible. I got to interview Amber Rodriguez. So it just grew out of me imitating that podcast that Prince's estate does every time they release something. So it was just a copycat thing, but it's been really cool. I got to interview Valerie Hawes about her mother, Lula May Provo, the woman I mentioned who didn't want to be interviewed for the documentary. So it's been a cool outlet to be able to showcase some of these other stories that I wasn't able to include in the documentary, and also get the reaction of women who wrestle now to these legends that came before them.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, have you been able to keep up with the A&E and Dark Side of the Ring episodes and stuff? Have you been watching those?
I've caught them here and there. The one that really caught my attention was the one about Sweet Georgia Brown, since that was about another Black woman wrestler. She was really big in the 60s, who, she wasn't on, as I said, she wasn't on the same circuit as Ethel and her sisters and the women who were managed by Billy Wolf. But I mean, I was just blown away by that, because, they pretty much, Sweet Georgia Brown's children pretty much said, our mother was being pimped out. She would go on these wrestling trips and she would come back pregnant. Now, the women I interviewed, they didn't say anything like that happened to them. It was all business, all professional. They weren't, as far as I know, they didn't tell me that they were, forced to perform sexual favors the way that Sweet Georgia Brown was. But that just goes to show you there's a whole other side of the business that I didn't cover in my documentary.
Was a dark? I'm very excited to interrupt. Chris and Rob. Was that a dark side of the ring episode? Yeah. I must have missed that.
Yeah, they did. They did one on Fabulous Moolah. Then they did an entire one on Sweet Georgia Brown. That was, I want to say, a couple years ago. It was 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, I was gonna say it wasn't. I think it was not this past season. The season before, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was. Yeah, I remember when they said that too. Yeah, she'd always come home pregnant. I was like, ooh, it was by what was his name? They always thought it was by home dude. I forget his name.
Yeah, I don't remember who they said, but her children, Sweet Georgia Brown's children, are biracial, so they just made it sound like she was being used by these different white men in the wrestling industry. And my heart goes out to her, because that's just a rough position to be in, and feeling like you can't really say no because you have children back home to support. And so like I said, there's just many different chapters to the experience of Black women in wrestling. There's good things, and then really tragic, traumatic things like that as well.
And this is why I'm glad that Speaking Out movement came out now, because now we're getting rid of all these sleazeballs, and I hope more and more women, regardless of what ethnicity they are, start taking a stand and be like, hey, just because I'm a certain color doesn't mean you get to take advantage of me. I hope they start saying that more, and because honestly, I have enjoyed this business as a fan for 31 years actually.
Right.
And I've been aware of what has gone on behind the scenes, how political it could be, but I didn't know it was to that extent. And
right, I didn't either. It's like when you pull back the layers, it's like, it's some ugly little things squirming around under there.
Like when I hear some of the things that go on, I look at these especially these promoters, I'm like I gotta shake my head, and it's just unbelievable. And I'm glad that Speaking Out movement happened, and they got rid of all of these people that are just bad for business. And hopefully they got rid of all the bullies and the perverts and even the pedophiles. I saw that Grizzly Jones, Grizzly Smith. That made me sick to my stomach. I was wow.
Yeah.
If my dad ever did something like that, you would have probably, I probably would have gone to jail for assaulting my father because
Yeah, you and me both.
Because that, imagine you're somebody's father, you're raising two men.
Right.
You're supposed to raise them, show them how to treat the ladies.
Right.
That's what, and not only that too, his wife allegedly molested his son, and I'm that dad. Like I'm weird like that. Like, if I had a son, I don't care if she's a female. A predator is a predator.
Right.
You ain't touching my son.
Right.
If you want to talk to me, fine. Yeah, if I'm single, yeah, I'm a single guy. But you're not gonna touch my son. You're gonna go somewhere, go to a college place, get yourself a freshman. There's a lot of you and I was like so disappointed. I mean, I can't really say I was disappointed that much because I heard from Jump Grizzly Smith wasn't that great of a father anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you know, I didn't know it to what extent it was. That's the part that got me. I was like, wow, and you got a whole daughter too on top of that. That's what you're doing, like
that's the thing. I mean, about the way society has changed so much is like things like that just used to be swept under the rug and covered up, and now things are coming to light, and it's just like people like you and me, you and me and Rob, who are fans. Sometimes, unfortunately, we find out things about our idols that are like, I wish I could unsee that, or I wish I didn't know that, because it's like things that used to be covered up for years and years. Now people, I'm glad people are being more comfortable about coming forward and stuff, but it's just like, we're just seeing like the ugly side of life that was for years just covered up. And, the image of wrestlers that we thought were just had these, we just thought they were squeaky clean, or they were like great people outside of the ring. Unfortunately, we find out the real truth now. So yeah, that's the downside about finding out the truth.
Yeah, that was I was very turned off by that episode, and like I said, I hope that for the betterment of the business, because when I heard that whole speaking out movement, I'm probably one of the few fans that felt for those people, for those victims.
Yeah,
I felt several. And like I said, I probably shouldn't get into my feelings because I'm not part of the business, but I felt for those victims. I felt embarrassment. I felt rage. Like I have 4 sisters, and I think they could have been in that business. That could have been them. And I'm like, do these men not have like sisters they care? Do not have a mother? Like, it's just.
But that's
even and I mentioned them.
Yeah.
I'm also sorry to, and I probably should not be saying this on air. Moolah was another one too. And I'm like, are you serious? I thought women were supposed to empower you. How are you going to take your fellow woman and do that? I'm like, are you serious?
See, that's the thing that blew my mind is like, you can understand, not necessarily you can understand, but that men will tend to like try to take advantage of women. But when you have another woman, like you said, women are supposed to empower and, at least take, say, hey, don't go in that situation, warn other women. But, from the way they portrayed it on the dark side of the ring, she would do anything for money. So her name was accurate, Fabulous Moolah. I don't know those facts to be true, but that's the way they portrayed it on the dark side of the ring.
It is just, I don't know. Rob, my bad, man. Go ahead, bro. I didn't mean to cut you.
No, you're good. You're good. So, man, I don't know how I can pivot from that, but here we go. I'm gonna try. You said earlier on, man, you used to watch wrestling. Your grandparents used to go over there. They had a big screen, like 4-mile TV. My grandmother had one, and that's the one where it was like big screen, but you just sit it on the floor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, she had that, but it didn't work. But she got another and just left it there and put another TV on top of that and just left it there. It was like, well, why didn't you just get an entertainment center, Grandma? You know what I mean? It was right there. Like, all right,
those things were too heavy to move. It's like
Oh yes,
trying to move.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Because I think when she passed, we were trying to move that thing. It was like, Yeah.
Yep.
And she also had a black and white TV too, because I remember watching that like this is like the 80s or 90s or whatever. Like, why you got
Right.
black and white TV? Like, what are you doing?
Right.
So,
Right.
hey,
Right.
yeah, and don't mind me. Hush your mouth. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's right. Oh man. Now you are a world traveler too. I did get to see, man. You traveled all over the world. Like, what are some of your favorite places to see? Because I did see one
Yeah.
where you were in Africa and stuff, and I was like, oh man, don't they have like the
Yeah.
wild, crazy animals over there, man? Where you sitting there? Because I've been sitting there like, yeah, man, is something gonna get me?
Yeah, well, that was a great opportunity. There's a dance company here in Columbus called Chasan Dance Institute, and they're affiliated with Senegal. So they make periodic trips to Senegal. So this was right, I swear to God, like right before the pandemic hit, the very end of 2019. In fact, we rang in the new year of 2020 over in Senegal. And that was really cool. And we were just in the city for the most part. We did take a little voyage out to the countryside, but we went to Senegal, we went to Gambia. And we were just the villages and the cities that we were in. We didn't see wild animals and stuff. I didn't see any monkeys. I didn't see any lions or tigers or bears. All I saw were like goats. People keep goats like pets over there. Like they'll have you'll see somebody literally walking a goat on a leash, the way that people walk dogs over here. You see a lot of cats. People keep, but you know what? People don't really so much believe in house pets over there. They believe that animals are for the outside. So you would see dogs, in the street, but you wouldn't really see, at least not with the parts I was in, people keeping animals inside their house so much. But that was just awesome. We went to the most emotional parts of the trip was we went to the slave ports in Senegal and Ghana, where the slave ships, where the ships carrying the slaves for to bring them over to the the United States and different parts of Latin America. And you could just feel the like souls of those people who have been shackled. So that was really an emotional journey. And I'm just so glad I got to do that before the pandemic, because who knows when things are going to go back to completely normal and we'll be able to just freely travel the world again. And like I said, I got to go to the south of France for the Cannes Film Festival back in 2017 to kind of meet with different producers. And that was back when I was trying to decide how do I distribute Lady Wrestler. Now that I've made it, how do I distribute it? But the south of France, I tell you, that place is like paradise. It's like palm trees and perfect weather every day, and you see yachts. And I got to stand like on the red carpet, well, next to the red carpet, and like you would just see. I saw Mary J. Blige because she was in that movie Mudbound. She was there promoting that. I saw Adam Sandler, Sophia Coppola. Jessica Chastain. You would just see these people walking by, and then just by chance, I met this sales agent who helps filmmakers get distribution. She was like, "Why don't you come to this screening tonight?" So I got to go to they call it the Grand Lumiere, the big theater where they have all the big screenings. And there's this French actress named Isabelle Huppert, who's like the French Meryl Streep. So I got to sit through her movie, and I have to tell you, it was a boring movie with subtitles. So I fell asleep during it, but it was cool just to be there and to say I did that. So yeah, that was awesome. So I have to say, definitely Africa. Being an African American, going to the homeland, that was probably my favorite place. But getting to go to Europe, and then I took the train up to Paris. Getting to go to Paris, and that was a scary train ride because it goes through the mountains. And there were times where the train would almost be sideways, like you're riding on a roller coaster. And they put you in these sleeping compartments with like 3 other people. They have bunk beds. So they have 2 bunk beds on one side and 2 on the other. And I'm very claustrophobic. And so like when the last person would come in and close the door, it would be pitch black. They don't even have any windows. So I actually slept in the hallway. I just cannot sleep in a dark room that's closed up like that. And there were these French boys that were running back and forth the whole night, and they would just like leap over me because I was just sprawled out in the middle of the hallway. So that was kind of a funny experience. But yeah, I'm hoping things get back to normal and that we'll be able to travel again. I'm thinking it's like when I went to Africa, you had to get like a vaccine for yellow fever. I'm thinking it's going to be like that for COVID. Like you're going to have to enter certain countries, you're going to have to show your COVID vaccine card from now on.
Yeah, because I got that Johnson Johnson. I was like, let me get the one shot and done, because if I have to get 2 and stuff, I'm gonna forget about the second one. And like 6 months later and be like, you never got your second one. I'm like, oh man, that's
Yeah,
right. You know what I mean? Done. So I was like, let me get one and done. I'm good to go. You know what I mean? So yeah. But
yeah,
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 so I'm good to go. Hopefully, man. Yeah, hopefully we can travel some more stuff, man. Because I want like go Canada, Mexico. I want to get more stamps on that passport, man. I'm trying to build that thing up, man.
right, right. Yeah, Toronto's a great city. I've been there, and that's a big wrestling place. And Montreal too. Ethel and Ramona, they talked about going to Montreal a lot. And I didn't know Roddy Piper was Canadian. I found that out while
Oh, okay, yeah,
yeah, interviewing him and doing the research. So
yeah, that's
he
pretty
was
cool.
bilingual. He was bilingual. He spoke French. And actually, Ramona told a story where she and Roddy Piper were. I didn't include this in the documentary, but they were at a bar after a match, and this man was hitting on Ramona in French, and she didn't speak French, and Roddy Piper finally got irritated and like cussed the man out in French. I mean, Ramona could take care of herself. She was a wrestler,
Yeah.
but it was good to find out that Roddy. We were just talking about all the the scumbags that we found out about, but it was good to find out that Roddy Piper was like a stand-up guy and stood up for Ramona in that incidents.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah, Roddy Piper. Yeah, yeah. Everything I've seen him in is great. Even till before he passed, when he was in Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the Maniac.
Yeah,
Even that's great. You know what I mean? I'm always like, oh look, Piper. Yeah, he's the
yeah,
man. Oh,
yeah.
but yeah, man. But before I
I
pass it on
always
back
said,
to, oh no, go ahead, Remy.
I was gonna say, I always said, if you took Ric Flair and you took away the suits, gave him a jacket, shirt, and jeans, and you took away the girls, you got Roddy Piper, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like Rick without the
But
flair.
go ahead.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Rick without the flair. That's right. But yeah, man, I do want to say before I pass it on back to Remy, man, I want to say, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and stuff. Come on, chat with us, man. You had some awesome stories. I had a blast chatting with you and hearing about that stuff. And yeah, I definitely can't wait to check out that documentary, man. I know it's gonna be awesome. I've seen the trailers and all that stuff, and all the ladies you have on there, they were badass back in their day. And I hope your podcast, you keep getting more awesome people for your podcast. I hope it still grows good, and all the positive things happen to you and your family, man.
I appreciate it, Rob and Remy. Yeah, it's been great to be on. I really appreciate the support.
Yeah, Chris, I just gotta say, man, thank you very much for producing that, for directing, writing, and even producing that documentary. I really and truly hope it goes far. Please, 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 let's get a part 2, man. We gotta get a part
Absolutely.
2, man.
I'm gonna do everything.
I'm looking forward to that. We got to show, thank you for showcasing the sisters. Like I said, I didn't even know much about that. I didn't even know that they were like black female wrestlers back in the day.
Right.
Until well, there was another podcast that mentioned it, that the two of them, but I didn't know I didn't get more of a definitive history of female African American wrestlers back in that day. So thank you very much for actually giving us and I really and truly hope that it actually goes very far, man. Whatever we could do on our end, we'll definitely make sure more and more people know about it. But before we let you go, where can fans find you on social media if they want to check out the documentary or have questions regarding it? And where can everybody else find you on social media as well?
Yeah,
Other wrestlers that want to have their own documentary and so on.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So Lady Wrestler has a Facebook page. It's Lady Wrestler Movie on Facebook. And then there's a website for the documentary, ladywrestlermovie.com. And then you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under my own name, Chris Bournea. I know it's an odd name. It's supposedly French somewhere back in my lineage. But yeah, at Chris Bournea on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I also have my own website, chrisbournea.com.
Awesome. And just to let y'all know, Lady Wrestler is available on Amazon. Go ahead and check it out. It's You can buy it, you can rent it. It's only $7.99 on Amazon.
To buy,
You
and it's
know,
even cheaper to rent. I think it's like
to buy
$1.99
it.
to rent.
Yeah, it's $1.99 to rent it. It's not that much. I mean, some of y'all travel, use gas, and travel to go see a movie. You know, it's way less than an independent wrestling ticket for an adult. So definitely check out a bit of history. You know, I'm not trying to tell you what to do with your money, but I'm telling you, if you're a wrestling fan, this will definitely interest you. If you're a black wrestling fan, it'll interest you because it's a part of your culture, you know. And if you're any other ethnicity, you know, check it out as well. It'll show you a different side of how the business was back then, and so on. Only $7.99. You know, that's less than a McDonald's meal. That's less than, you know. Just definitely just check it out. It's worth it. But yeah. With that being said, Rob Base, where can fans find you on social media if you know they want to be on the show, talk wrestling, and where can bookers or promoters find you, if they want to have you on this show as a referee? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, he's actually training to be a referee. So yeah, where you at on social media, man?
Yeah, you can find me Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch at Rob_base82, and then YouTube and Facebook, Rob Base.
Awesome. And if you want to find me on social media, not that I have anything cool to say, but who knows, maybe you'll get lucky. You can find me on Twitter under @TheRemyBlue. You can also find me on Facebook under Remy Blue. It's a picture of me at WrestleMania 28. So definitely go ahead and follow me on there. Our podcast is also on social media. We're on Twitter and Ringside Society. We're also on Twitch under Ringside Society 2019. And we're also on YouTube. Just type in Ringside Society and you'll find us. If it doesn't have that blue logo, it's not us. We have a lot of great interviews like this one with Chris Bournea. We have interviews with Princess Victoria, who was one half of the first ever WWF Women's Tag Team Champions. Jasmine Allure, Maddie Minkowski, John Cosper, who actually wrote Princess Victoria's autobiography, and Saraya Knight. Many other great interviews and more to come. So definitely follow us as well. Also follow our check out our Teespring store. We have merchandise there as well. Grab a shirt, grab a tank top for the hot summer days, grab a long sleeve for the cold soon to come cold winter nights. Grab a face mask or a coffee mug, whatever you can just support us. All proceeds go back into keeping this show afloat. We don't put it in our pockets. Trust me. I'm still eating, ramen noodles. So with that being said, what, Rob? Am I missing anything else? Okay, I don't think I am. But with that being said, also follow our mods, Alicia at Endo Survivor 282 on Twitter, and also her mother, who's our other mod, at Survivor Queen 424 as well. And also they're on her mother's also on under at Jen Lynn Bar 1. I keep forgetting your mom has a different name, Alicia. But with that being said, thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight live. We really and truly do appreciate it. To those of y'all that are going to listen to us later on via our YouTube channel or Twitch channel, thank you in advance. And to those of y'all that hate us, can't stand us, and really and truly wish you would just go away, well, we feel very sorry. But with guests like Chris Bournea, we're not going anywhere for a while.
They hate us because they ain't us.
And we ain't stopping. We got more stories to be told, man. But with that being said, we here at Ringside Society just want everybody to know that we're well aware that everybody and their grandparents and their parents have a podcast. But we're not your grandparents' podcast. We're not your parents' podcast. Damn sure, just any podcast. Hey, yo, Rob Base, one time for the mind, one time for the people, and one time for the wrestling culture, and one time for Chris Bournea and the great work that he did on that documentary. And for the follow-up, I'm wishing it into existence. What type of podcast are we?
We're the Wrestling Fans Podcast.
That's right. We're the Wrestling Fans Podcast, Ringside Society, hashtag We Are Not the Same. So with that being said, we will be back this Sunday with another impressive guest. But until then, during this pandemic, stay healthy, stay safe, be excellent to each other, and party on, dudes. We out. Peace.
See y'all. Good night. Stay classy, Delaware.